Good evening, and welcome to the first lecture of 2025. This should prove to be an engaging and fun conversation about what it was like to grow up here in Los Alamos. But before we get started, I first want to thank our sponsor, TechSource. Because of them, we can do events like this, so we really appreciate their generous support. And I would like to make a special introduction. We have a new educator here at the Los Alamos Historical Society. So Rachel, would you please come up? She has to walk down the aisle. This is Rachel Clay, and she is our new educator here at the Historical Society. And soon you're going to see her up here doing this, not me. Yes. So look for her in the future, and she is already busy putting together our 2025-2026 lecture series. So we're glad to have Rachel on the team. So like I said, tonight's lecture is a little different in its format. It is a panel discussion, not a lecture from one individual. And they will be sharing their stories about what it was like to grow up here in Los Alamos. And somebody said tonight at dinner we could actually have one of these panel discussions once a year and invite different people from all over town to come and talk about what it was like to grow up here in Los Alamos. So it should be very interesting and fun. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our panelists. The first one, and I'm going to try to read their bios without making mistakes, is Victor Rutherford. Victor's parents and five, or clap for him. Victor's parents and five older siblings moved to Los Alamos in 1950. Additional sons came along in 50, 52, and Victor in 54. Following high school graduation in 1972, he went to college in Nebraska, California, and at UNM, earning various degrees. He's not telling us what those degrees are. In 1992, Victor, his wife Ann, and young daughter Amelia moved to White Rock. A couple of years later, their son Ethan joined them. In 2023, the family moved to downtown Los Alamos. Victor worked...
When did that?
Pardon?
When did we move?
Oh, 2003. Excuse me, not 2023. That was just 2 years ago. 2003. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Victor worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory for 26 years as a health and safety training specialist and is now retired. In addition to puttering around the house and around town, you might see him doing that. He is involved in volunteer work, including at our guest cottage right over here where the museum is, as one of our docents. Our next panelist is Todd Nichols. Todd was born in Los Angeles, California, and moved to Los Alamos when he was 1 year old. His father was a nuclear physicist at LaSalle. His mother was a medical biologist at the laboratory. Todd grew up in Western area, delivering newspapers to many of the well-known scientists. He moved to Nebraska, too, to go to college. How weird is that? And then returned and became a photographer for the laboratory. Following that, he opened his own commercial photography business and contracted to the laboratory. He landed a couple of small acting roles for TV and film. Sorry. He lived off of his residuals for a bit, then realized it wouldn't last. That's what led him to the Historical Society, where he has worked for 9 years. He now enjoys his role as the executive director of the Los Alamos Historical Society. Next is Allison Watkins. Allison, née Honig, was born in Los Alamos in 1976 to Carol and the late Emmanuel Honig. She is the sister of Kristen Honig and Stephen Honig. After graduating from Los Alamos High School in 1994, Allison attended Texas Tech University, where she earned a BA in history. She also met her husband, Heath, at Texas Tech. Upon graduation, the couple moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where they began a family and lived for 12 years. Allison and her family moved to Los Alamos in 2011. I got that one right. She and Heath are the proud parents of 3 boys, ages 20, 16, and 11, all of whom attended Chamisa Elementary School. Allison was a stay-at-home mom for many years, but re-entered the workforce with jobs at the Los Alamos Historical Society and Los Alamos High School. She now works as the event manager for Los Alamos Main Street and Creative District. Most of her free time is spent with her kids' sports and activities, serving on various community boards, and in her adult ballet classes and performances. Our final panelist is Michaela Gilpin. Michaela was born and raised in Los Alamos as a second-generation Los Alamosian. That's a hard word to say. I'm not sure it's a real word. My grandparents moved to Los Alamos in 1952, her grandparents, and built the 7th house in White Rock, in which both her father and she were raised. She was homeschooled for the duration of K through 12 education, but she had the opportunity to play softball for Los Alamos High School from 8th grade to 12th grade. She went on to attend Taylor University and obtained a BS in exercise science and played softball for 1 year. While at Taylor, she met her husband, Trey. They got married shortly after graduating, moved to Albuquerque, where Trey and she both attended graduate school, law and physical therapy, respectively. She's a physical therapist. About 2 years later, they moved back to Los Alamos, and they had, so that their child, could grow up in a safe community near his cousins, aunts, and uncles and grandparents. So we're going to start now with questions for, one more quick thing. You might have seen this on the table in the back. It's not a program for tonight, it's a gift for you to take. A Girl Scout here in town wrote this and created it, and it's about what life was like growing up in Los Alamos. And we thought it would be a fun souvenir for you to take from tonight's lecture. They're out on the table where the big bright sign that says Los Alamos History Museum. Did you see that? Couldn't miss it, right? They're on that table. So pick one up as you leave if you did not already.
So I must give a quick Los Alamos disclaimer. We cannot confirm nor deny anything we say tonight.
Anything you hear tonight, shh. No, kidding. And by the way, I will open it for questions from the audience at the end after I've asked our panelists some discussion questions. So please hold your questions until we get to the end, and yes, you'll have a chance to ask your questions. You guys ready?
So let me just say something before we start. I know that at least half the audience here are people who grew up in Los Alamos. So that's interesting. And the other half, almost to a person, I know are people who have lived here for a long time. So we recognize that. We even amongst ourselves have different takes, different stories to tell. And so we recognize that you all do as well. And so hopefully we don't.
Like I said, we could do this once a year and have a whole new panel. Because it is fun to hear one another's stories about what it is like to live here and for a long time, and particularly to be raised here. So you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So my first question for our panelists is, what was it like growing up in a town with such a strong connection to the Manhattan Project? Takers? Oh, you guys have to tell your stories.
We did run through this in practice.
We did.
So
And they did answer.
Get rolling a little bit here. Well, I mean, it was definitely just sort of a part of just growing up. You knew what had happened here, and you knew what your parents' job titles were. You didn't know a thing about what they were doing, but it was just part of it. And so it was very, we knew to me, and this has come out a little bit too, but just going to the grocery store, you would hear talk of physics or chemistry. You wouldn't hear talk of football or baseball. It was all about science.
Well, and one of those things was, oh, GMX7, oh, HS such and such, which, for those that moved here, I know for my wife, that was kind of a weird thing to always be hearing about technical areas with no context to that. So I have a little bit, and me being the geezer here, I reserve the right to use my paper.
So let me just say that for a moment, our panelists do represent several decades, no offense, here in Los Alamos. And you can kind of tell that by just looking at them.
That was my design.
It was by design, but, sorry, Victor.
No, so we were always aware of the Manhattan Project that happened here. But for me, during my youth, the threat of the Cold War was actually what occupied that level of talk in the town, and we were constantly being reminded of that through evacuation drills, through bomb shelter drills, through duck and cover drills, through watching Khrushchev rant on the TV, through the Cuban Missile Crisis, through the silence here, and a bit of tension. So that for us was definitely overshadowed what had happened prior to that. And we knew that Los Alamos played a fairly significant role in kind of the fate of our country, if not the world, during that time.
I remember when I was a kid, we had some friends visit from Germany, and there was a test explosion, and we lived just right down the canyon from it, so our house always shook from it. So these friends are visiting, and the pictures start shaking, and I just, as a kid, I said, "Oh, don't worry about that, that's just the bombs going off." And I didn't know that that wasn't normal to say, that wasn't a normal childhood experience, but that was just the thread of Los Alamos, and seeing you guys here, you know what I'm talking about, like your houses have been shook as well.
We done? Okay. How did the history of Los Alamos influence the way people viewed their hometown, do you think, growing up? Kind of continuation of that.
Yeah, does this work?
Yes.
So I grew up mostly 80s, early 90s, and my dad worked here, and for sure, like the overarching view then was that people were very, very proud of building the bomb and ending the war, which I think is a conversation now that you see changing a little bit, or at least people are willing to have discussions about it, but back then, that was the way it was, and so that was my experience.
Los Alamos is known for being a science town, as we've just heard. What was the general atmosphere around education and intellectual curiosity during your childhood?
We were just expected to be very well educated and to do well. And my mom's in the audience, so she will correct me. But I wasn't, I started out pretty good on a good track in school, and then just got really bored with it. So I spent a lot of time in the canyon, I admit, like a lot of us did. But it was very important. Once I left Los Alamos, I realized that especially like my first year in college was sort of a review of my high school. And so it was amazing to realize that growing up here really it stuck with me, that education. I have to say, all of our teachers were really dedicated to the students all the time.
So one thing that isn't certainly original to me, but I think a lot of people have experienced this, because there definitely was some science emphasis, and one of the things that showed me that in elementary school was while I, for a 5th grade science fair project, was making a still using a coffee can and a coiled tube and some clay for sealant and stuff. While I was doing that, I had classmates who were doing things like making cloud chambers out of stainless steel vessels and glass cylinders and stuff. So there's always a bit of that. But one of the things is for people who weren't necessarily of a scientific, math, engineering bent, it's, I think a lot of students have struggled, and it was true when I was a kid, and maybe in some ways it's still true, especially when we didn't know what our parents necessarily did. We couldn't just go to their office and see that they were a dentist or a CPA or whatever it might be. So it was hard for the non-science kind of person to think, oh, here's a valid career that I could have. So it could be hard to think of, boy, where's my place in life here?
Yeah, I totally understand that, having not gone down the technical route. But growing up here, I think the question wasn't like, are you gonna go to college? The question was, where are you gonna go? And then maybe added on to that was, what type of engineering are you gonna study? And so I could answer the first two, which was nice, but then when it came down to, well, I'm gonna study exercise science, it's like, oh, are you a PE teacher? Or, I got a lot of questions like that. But one thing about the education atmosphere in town, I think I had a little bit of a different perspective because I was homeschooled, and I played sports I played softball for the public school. One memory that comes to mind was I had a coach in particular that was really concerned about what I was learning, and especially what level math I was in and what topics of math I was learning. And it was practice after practice after practice. I would get cornered and asked, so like, what are you learning in math today? Do you know what an integral? And I'm like, I'm not in calculus, I don't know, like I'm a freshman in high school. And so finally, it came to a head where he asked me, you have siblings, right? I do. And were they homeschooled? So I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and all 5 of us were homeschooled. And he goes, oh, did they come to anything in life? And I said, as a matter of fact, yes. He said, my oldest sister's a nurse, my next brother's a mechanical engineer, my next sister has her degree in math, my next brother, he's at the Air Force Academy right now. And he was like, oh, so it works. I was like, well, I think so. And I never got another question again.
Do you think that has changed at all in Los Alamos? That
The
attitude?
view of homeschooling?
No, the intellectual and academic push.
No,
No.
I don't think so.
No.
Okay, I just wondered what your thoughts were.
I mean, homeschooling, it's considered just as great of a, process as anything else. There's a lot of very dedicated homeschooling people here in town who really dedicate themselves. Their parents dedicate themselves to their children. And like Michaela said, it's not expected. It's not like middle school.
But to answer your question, which I misinterpreted, but no, I think it's still, I worked at the high school guidance counseling office for a year, and it's definitely still that way. Which is kind of unfortunate because not everybody goes into the science profession. I mean, to me, exercise science is science, but it's not engineering, right? So,
I took statistics.
I think that probably is something that should change for the benefit of the kids these days.
Good answers. The town's population was historically made up of scientists and their families. How did that affect the types of people you encountered growing up?
My father said, I grew up in the western area. I delivered newspapers to the Bradburys, Colgates. Satch Cowan taught me how to swim, so it's just, and actually Lois Bradbury was my 5th grade teacher. Jean Nearson was my third grade teacher, and just something fun right now. Jean Nearson actually, if you guys didn't know, had a blind date with Klaus Fuchs at one time, long before I was around, but I always thought that was kind of interesting.
There was not a second date.
No, there was not a second.
She was a discerning woman.
So we did, you know, and like Victor and I were talking about last week, is that I didn't know Norse Bradbury as Norse Bradbury. I knew him as Mr. Bradbury. You know, I mean, I went and delivered papers to him. They gave away full-size candy bars during Halloween, though, so that was huge. But it was just, we just knew these people, and like I said, Satch Cowan taught me how to swim. George was just, you know, just another guy, you know, he was Mr. Cowan. And how we knew people.
Right, and there were lots of scientists and engineers, but there were also a lot of people that were technicians or Zia company, skilled trades or maintenance people. And you know, sometimes we would hear something of, oh, there goes Mr. So-and-so, and it was always Mr., rarely doctor unless it was a physician or a dentist or something. But, oh, there goes Mr. So-and-so. And to us, typically as kids, we didn't care about the status of these people. And I think part of what reinforced us not caring is on Saturday mornings, we would see Norris Bradbury at the Episcopal Church out there clipping the weeds, wearing his khaki shirt, khaki pants, clipping weeds, or clipping grass, pulling the weeds and stuff, just doing normal, everyday, just man of people kind of things. And so we didn't care.
And it doesn't just have to be the more elite scientists. I mean, unique people that you might have seen in town or eccentric.
Well, one thing, so I delivered the Los Alamos Monitor for many years, and so I remember we would fold the paper in thirds and then fold it in thirds and stuff in, so it was a nice little block, and we would throw it at the doors, trying to get people's attention. And one is, even when you had people who we knew were making pretty good money, it'd be, oh, you'll have to, my wife has the checkbook, you'll have to hit her over. Oh, no, my husband is the one that takes care of that, you know, so I thought, oh, goodness mercy, come on. But I remember one time throwing the thing, and then I see this guy out on his porch, and I don't think he's reading it, I think he's looking at this fold, and he's probably going through some kind of topology of, oh, look how it's done, or something. Just kind of just suddenly fixed on this kind of thing. So you'd see that, or you'd hear stories about people just stopping at a stoplight, and we didn't have that many back then especially, but stopping at a stoplight, maybe they're suddenly into some kind of big thought process, and the light would go through several cycles, and then we like somebody honking, oh, they help wake up to reality. So there was...
They were doing some ciphering in their head.
That's right,
After my grandfather died, my grandmother remarried Wilden Pickett, and I didn't understand as a kid like who Wilden was, but as an adult I learned that he was like a laboratory fellow, and he had a physics textbook that he had written. So I didn't understand this. I just knew Wilden as like Wilden, and you had to be careful what questions you asked, because if you asked the right one, I did one time, I asked, what's that? And I don't know how long it was, maybe 30, 40, it felt like an eternity as a kid. I got like a small dissertation on what an oscilloscope is, because it happened to have that in his garage, and that's what he played with for fun. So that kind of thing, like I just would run into that a lot. And Wilden's Where Is It file, he had a thing on his computer, it's called Where Is It? And whenever he would get something, a shoe, it didn't matter what it was, a water bottle, that anything that came into his house was logged into the Where Is It file. And so then when he couldn't find something, he would go to the Where Is It file, and he's like looking for the pair of glasses that were given by Dr. So-and-so on this date, and it was written on the inside of his glasses, he would know to go check the shelf in the guest room on the left, but he knew exactly where everything was.
Well, and Mr. Pickett was a very, very quiet, unassuming kind of guy. I remember I was over there at their house one time, and John and I were, one of his sons were messing around, and we happened to go into this one bedroom, and he said, oh, here, look at this. And he opened this drawer, and it was just full of science medals that Wilden had won over the years, but you would never know that from just talking.
He was just one of the guys, because they're
Until you ask the right question.
Right, but like you said, not everybody was called doctor, because everybody's doctor. He was just Mr. Pickett, just wasn't.
Yeah. And he played volleyball pretty well, too.
Okay, I'll move on. Changing it just a slight little bit. Because we do live in such a beautiful part of New Mexico, what was the role of the outdoors and nature in your life growing up? Because that certainly is part of Los Alamos as well, not just intelligence and academics, science.
It was huge. It was absolutely huge. We spent a lot of time outside. In fact, during the summer or during Saturdays, after your chores were done, it was like you got kicked out of the house. It was like, go outside, go play, go do things. And it was wonderful. And we were expected to go out and ski or, run around and not sit and watch TV. If you watch a little bit too much TV, you got in a lot of trouble. Yeah, it does about your brain, Something about really trying to hear you. But thinking about like nature, out in nature, it was also, so I grew up in the 70s, which, as you guys know, was a very sort of free time. And so, like I was saying, Satch, this is a cute, and I think the world of Satch. We were lucky enough to be part of the Mesa Meadow Pool. If you guys don't know where that is, it's right behind, UNM now, which used to be Mesa School. But there was about 15 families there in the western area that would take care of this pool. And this was before internet, and we all had landlines, but once a year on Satch's birthday, 2 days before her birthday, she'd either walk around to everybody's house or call them on the phone and say, remember, it's my birthday. Nobody is allowed to swim until afternoon. Satch would always be there at 7 a.m. every day. She would swim, just a great swimmer. Well, on her birthday, she liked to swim in the nude. And so nobody was allowed to be there. And it wasn't anything weird, it was just, we all just knew this was part of Satch's birthday tradition. And so it was like, okay, we just don't show up and swim until afternoon.
Yeah, in her birthday suit.
In her birthday, exactly. So it was a very, very, free time,
Yeah, I grew up on the edge of North Community at 36 in Arizona. So we were just constantly out in the woods playing, building tree forts, building underground forts, hiking, climbing mountains and stuff, or building dams in the Rindia Canyon stream, which back then actually flowed almost all year round. Or we'd be fishing at LA Reservoir, at Wahi Reservoir. So it was a huge part. And another thing we did was we slept outside, especially during the summer, just a lot. And I remember actually, we had very dark skies, and I remember actually times of watching Sputnik and then Telstar going across the sky as we'd be sitting pondering infinity and pondering eternity and watching the, thinking about, wow, the expanse, that's incredible. So.
Well, and I think historically, the outdoors, going back to, you could go back to the Winter School, but certainly the Manhattan Project is a necessary component to what has gone on here, don't you think? As far as distraction from the work that's being done and the mental fatigue that happens in this town. It's a very important component in this community with what goes on here, to have the beautiful outdoors that we have.
Yeah, that's very true, because, I mean, I see plenty of you guys out on the hiking trail. Like I see David, frequently on the trail, or, other people. It's just, no matter what your job is, it's just sort of a balance, like you said. It's a good balance.
So I went to college in Northeast Indiana, and if you've not been there, it's really gray. The skies are really low, like concrete skies. It feels suffocating to me. But I remember one time, maybe like freshman and sophomore year, one of my professors, he saw I was kind of down. He's like, "How you doing?" And I was like, "This is like devastating to me. Like, I need some sun. Like, I'm having a hard time." Because it wasn't until then that I realized the gift that it was to grow up here, to have however many trails within 5 minutes of my front door. Like, I did not understand, or to ride my bike by Mr. Rumner's house every evening and stop in and say hi. Like, I did not understand that gift. And so he's like, Michaela, you really should consider like learning to find beauty in things other than like sun and mountains and canyons. And I was like, I don't know, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I need to grow in that. So a couple years down the road, I have an internship at the lab, and he has to come out for the school part of it and examine what I did. So I take him on a hike, we're on deer trap, and we're like maybe halfway down the mesa. He stops mid-trail and he turns around and in the most just like melancholy way says, "I understand what you're saying." I was like, yes, thank you, I appreciate that, because Indiana is flat and boring. And so then my husband's from Indiana, and this was a number of our early marital conflicts was like, I need to go outside. And he's like, "Ooh, what do we do outside?" We stay inside, we don't go out, and no, we have to get out. And his sister came to visit. I wore a baseball cap outside, and she goes, "You're not embarrassed to wear that outside?" I'm like, "What?" Like, and she goes, "We would never do that." Like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "No, the sun is gonna kill me. I'm looking." So I didn't understand the gift of it till moving away, now coming back.
So which side of the coin would you say your family falls most on? The science, academic side, or the outdoors?
We're a perfect blend of both.
Oh.
No.
Perfect answer. How about the rest of you? More
Scientific. I mean, my birth family, not necessarily my family now. But I was gonna say too, to go on to that one about nature, I think that, that both the fires, but particularly Cerro Grande, was really galvanizing for this community, and that's, our interface with nature, which, goes back to kind of how you interact with it.
So true. Thinking about delivering newspapers again and being outside nature. My mom always, her flowers were beautiful, the grass was beautiful. If you've ever been over now, I know a lot of you have. As I was delivering newspapers, I would deliver newspapers for the Albuquerque Journal in the morning and the New Mexican in the afternoon. And I always rode my bike, and many of flower beds were killed because of me. In fact, Barbara Jean Wilson, if you guys remember her, I remember I ran over her flowers, and the very next day she was standing there. She was mad, and she got me off my bike and explained to me that if I needed to go on this path, I could go right here, but I could not go here. And she told me very much where I could ride and where.
I have an example of the blend of both, scientific and outside. So I hope he's here. My brother Curtis is here somewhere. For his, yes, back there in the corner, thank you. His lunchtime favorite activity was to play World War II in our backyard. So we were outside, I dug foxholes with him. I mean, he painted his face, and so he was a big World War II buff. So he'd learn a lot about World War II, and then he'd go
He was the
reenact.
one that went to the Air Force Academy.
And he would reenact it. So because we had the land in our backyard and the nice weather, that's what we did for fun at lunch.
So as far as that kind of blend there, so I think my father's primary draw being here was he felt like the work he was doing was very important, but also nature was very, very important to him. And part of that's reflected in when they chose the house that they were going to live in back in 1950. He chose the house up at the top of 36th Street because it had just this huge, expansive view of the Sangre de Cristos, and also he could see the lights of Santa Fe. And we spent a lot of time with we had a huge picture window of that, drapes just all the way open so we could see that, and watching thunderstorms, and cooked out. And when the weather was nice, almost every evening and stuff, because he loved that. And then later on, my mother, when I was in 5th grade, with a bunch of other ladies in town, started hiking on Wednesdays, and they were hardcore hikers, top of Wheeler Peak, Santa Fe Baldy, Truchas Peak and stuff. They weren't just going for little walks, they were doing some serious hiking, and did that up until their 70s and 80s and stuff. So.
And you see that in this town. You
Oh,
see
yeah, a lot.
people doing that are not young, and that's impressive. So moving to a different topic slightly. We are rather isolated up here in Los Alamos. How did the towns, not as much as we once were, but going back, how did the town's isolation and security measures, especially with Los Alamos being a restricted area for a long time, shape your childhood experiences? Were there any rules, restrictions you remember feeling particularly strange or not strange? I mean, that's all you knew.
Well, I have to admit, when you saw a sign that said, danger, explosives, you usually didn't go in there. Barbed wire didn't mean so much, but those signs, because unfortunately I did have a couple of friends that were injured by some of these mines that were still down in the canyon. And so we learned very quickly what you really should or should not do. And that wasn't so much always based on what you were told.
Right, and rather than, so yeah, there were the 6-foot fences you wouldn't cross, but rather than restriction, we, especially in my earlier years and stuff, when it was, well, when I was 3 is when they took the gates down, and it wasn't until I was 12, 13 when they started selling the houses into private houses, and earlier there was development of Bronco Mesa and White Rock and Palmdale Acres. But before all that happened, that meant if you lived in town, you had either something to do directly with the laboratory, or even if you worked in a store or something, you were vetted at some level to be here in town, and you didn't live here, even retirees couldn't stay and stuff. So it was a pretty secure environment. So rather than being restrictive, we had just full reign of the town, and took advantage of that. And so the whole town was our playground. I remember even when I was 7, hitchhiking fairly often, hitchhiking from far north community to downtown to hang out and stuff. And people would give me rides. Nobody said, "What are you doing out on your own?" And so for a long time was that. And then with the opening up of the town, then there started to be a little bit more maybe awareness of, oh, there's some other people that are not like me here. And so not saying that anyone who's not connected with the laboratory directly is any more of a threat, but there was potential for that. They didn't all have 2 clearances anymore.
I think the secrecy and the security is what allows Los Alamos to be the community it is, the freedom that we have, the freedom for kids to play, for us to enjoy the outdoors so much. But one thing I remember as a kid, I think I was maybe like 12, definitely at an age that was inappropriate to be carried by your father. But this was normal to me. I was with my mom for the day, and I needed to be switched to my dad. And the only place we could meet was at his office. and he worked at Lance, and at the time, we could drive to the parking lot, but we weren't allowed to get out of the vehicle. So I had to switch to my dad's car though. So my dad picked me up out of his car and carried me over to his car and put me in his car. And to me, that was,
Ground.
I never touched the ground. I did not break it. And I was like, okay, whatever, that's the rules. And now I think it was an adult, I'm like, what in the world?
I was talking with my mom this morning, clearing some of this information that I could say or not say. But she reminded me, she asked me, and it was kind of a funny thing, she says, do you remember being brought home in a police car? And I'm like, I do, and
Which time?
yeah. So she, we came from Los Angeles, and so kids were not allowed to go outside by themselves at all. So we got here, and I was, young and about 3 years old, and I just started having wanderlust, and I would just take off, because it was so safe. And she's reminding me that, I came home in the police car. Well, she sort of had a little routine that she would go through. If she turned around and I'm gone, in just 10 minutes, first thing she would call my dad, and then she would call the police. And the police were so wonderful at this time. I mean, and they're still wonderful. But they would just say, okay, Mrs. Nichols, great, we'll keep an eye out for him, or we'll drive around and take a look. And so she reminded me this time that I came home in a police car, and I'm sitting in the front seat, just happy. I'm about 3 years old, and I'm just the happiest person. And as soon as I saw her, I just broke down in tears. And I'm like, oh, and I had lost my tricycle. And it was sort of an upsetting thing, but she remembers going, I think we were coming up Sandia and looping around because we lived 45th off of Trinity, and about 45th Street on the Sandia side, because there's paths that go all the way through. My tricycle was just sitting in somebody's yard, right there on the corner, and it was fine, and so there's my tricycle. And so that community involvement was so nice because you could lose your stuff as a kid, and it would be safe, and it would be there when you got back. And it was really nice to see. I don't know if you guys saw on Facebook, but a couple weeks ago, there's a picture of somebody's full cart of groceries in the Smith's parking lot saying, somebody drove away without your groceries. Please come back and get them. And so it's still really that sort of town.
But also, something else that went with that community feel was that every parent in the neighborhood felt the right to discipline. And they would. And so that was true.
That's a downside.
Well, probably an upside, really. But
For the parents, it was an upside. For you, it was a downside. So I'm hoping for some real free flow stories with this next question. Not that you haven't been sort of free flowing up to this point, but feel free to be freer. Okay? So, given the unique place that Los Alamos is for some of the reasons we've already stated, what were some traditions, cultural events, important things, memories, whether they had to do really with any questions I've asked so far, just unique traditions, memories, anything like that? This one's really open.
This one's all mine now. I've been waiting.
And I want each of you to answer on this one.
Okay, yeah, because I think it'll be interesting to see based on the decades, you're gonna have different memories, but some will overlap. Growing up for me, one of my favorite things to do was the KRSN Golden Egg Easter egg hunt. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but the Saturday before Easter, they would have gone out in the community and hidden these eggs, and there was a golden egg, and then we would drive around. I mean, a lot of families did this, drive around all day and had KRSN on their AM radio, and they would give you clues as to where the eggs were. My sister probably remembers this. And then there was one egg was the golden egg, and it was worth some monetary value, but all the eggs had prizes, and the clues, were all taking you to different landmarks in town, and I just absolutely loved that. And I think it was something I shared with my dad, so it was kind of a family memory. Because I think he spent a lot of time at work, so that was one thing he was doing that wasn't working.
Did you ever win the golden egg?
We never won the golden egg. We did find a few eggs, right, Kristen? 1A. Okay, 1A over all those years.
I don't remember what we won.
Yeah, I don't remember what we won, but that, and I was really sad when K-Artisan closed down for a number of reasons, but, I remember also fondly Mr. Fox, Dave Fox being Santa for my kids, or for myself when I was a kid, and then being able to bring my own kids here and have him be Santa for them was just, such a wonderful feeling, and of course the whole C.B. Fox, family. I loved all of our parades. I think the hometown feel of all the parades, when you know everybody pretty much in the parade. I think that's really unique to a small town, and then there's certain things that were unique probably to here as well. One more thing I'll mention before I pass it on for the moment is painting the LA as a senior in high school, so probably a lot of you remember doing that too. And did you do it, Kristen? Okay, so at some point, obviously, it stops because I have a 20-year-old and they definitely don't do it anymore. But we would hike up to the mountain with your white paint, and you get a lot more paint on you than you would the mountain. But we did have an LA there, and you can still see a faint outline.
I think it was the fire. Wasn't it the fire that kind of
It may have been.
impacted that? It didn't stop before that?
And then you'd wear your paint, keep your paint clothes, and then I think you'd wear them, not the next day, but some other day, all the seniors wore their paint clothes, and so those are some of the unique things that I remember and cherish from this town.
So, for me, definitely the parades, that kind of stuff. But also the Cub Scout Carnival, which was at the Rec Hall, which is now the little theater. I think that's the name of it. That Cub Scout Carnival was just a really fun event. Cakewalk, little cheap little toys and stuff you could win. And that was great. But also then there were the special events. And one of the prime special events was the Clowns softball games. And I don't think there was a Clowns game here that we missed. And most of the town was certainly there, very galvanizing to the community. And then there was the Harlem Globetrotters came here several times. And then there were a lot of people that from town, cultural events, Santa Fe Opera, but also Don Juan Playhouse, which is down in San Lopafonso. You can still see it melting away, the adobe's melting away. And so those events, but then on the more pop side, fairly regularly, like Fats Domino. I was too young to go, certainly, but I remember my older siblings going to see Fats Domino and other fairly big names that would be brought into Los Alamos, which for a town this size was pretty phenomenal. And within the Symphony Association stuff would bring in some fairly big names, musicians as well, or choruses and stuff that probably normally you wouldn't get. So those all just carried on partly from that musical emphasis that the Manhattan Project had, but just carried on through that. And the Los Alamos Symphony has been here since the beginning in various forms. So a lot of culture in there.
Definitely, I remember when Buddy Rich came and played at the high school. That was fabulous. I was a young drummer then, and it was just amazing to watch this gentleman. We were talking about this last week, that it was mainly from Jan McDonald, who was sort of the transition of all of that. Thinking about it, there were so many little traditions that we just did from growing up here, just eating out on the patio almost every night. Even when it would start getting chilly, we'd build a fire out on the patio, but you'd still eat outside, and then come back in. Zozobra actually was a big thing. I remember us driving down, and you could drive right down into the meadow that Zozobra was, and you'd walk right up to Zozobra. There was only, 100 people there, maybe, and you'd get the little mini Zozobras that you could try to light on fire, but they were trying to keep kids safe so it wouldn't light very well. It was just fun. But there was, now I understand there's 70,000 people that show up to this event, and I'm like, wow. So there were so many wonderful things. We were talking about climbing water towers.
Yeah, these kind of experiences we need to be sharing at this point too, not just cultural events, but memories. 'Cause I know you have them because they came out in our run-through.
So the,
I thought they got censored.
And not all of them got censored.
So, if you guys know up near Kemazon Trail, which not the Kemazon housing development, but the original Kemazon, and I guess they're called Satch Cowan Trails now. But there's 3 towers up there, 3 water towers. Well, 2 of them are, fat and wide, and one of them is 65 feet tall. I remember us climbing up this ladder to the top, all the way to the top, and yes, there were signs that said, do not enter, $20,000 fine, but we figured, well, let's give it a shot. So we climb up. You could actually, on top of this water tower, that water tower, you could see half of Sullivan Field. So we could watch half of a football game on Friday night from this water tower. It was very dangerous and foolish, but very fun.
Yeah, well, so we had the water tower back behind Arizona, and so we used to climb that all the time. Although one of the things that was kind of peeping was the bars for it. They put them at the angle, so you're kind of a diamond instead of a square, which was pretty hard on the hands. But I remember one time we were up on top of there, and it was near 4th of July, so we were rolling smoke bombs off the top, because of course you would. And suddenly this police car comes driving up and with his megaphone, all right, boys, I know you're up there. I could wait here all day for you if I used to. So you might as well come down. And I had just had poison ivy in between these 2 fingers. So my hand was all bandaged up. So coming down the ladder, I just one-handed it all the way down. And he was just like, oh, brother. So it turns out this is a guy that knew one of my oldest brothers, and they'd gone to school together or something. And so, but he told us, now make sure when you get home that you tell your parents about this, because it'll go much better if you tell them than when I call them and tell them. And so, of course, he never called. And so but just to make sure, we stayed at home making prank phone calls to do that. But also, speaking of water towers, so one of those big round flat water towers, we grew up with the story of a woman, and maybe some of you remember this, of a young 14, 15-year-old who was roller skating on the top of that, going around and actually lost control and went off and ended up breaking her arm. In some stories, broke her arm. Some stories it was more serious than that. But so we were constantly warning them, do not roller skate on the top of that.
Also, Peggy
You need to
Sue
tell
Bridge.
someone that.
I was gonna say, Peggy Sue Bridge, anybody? Yeah.
That's it.
But out this panel, who's naughty and who's nice?
Clearly. Yeah, one end up Veronica. So Veronica Tower, 100 rungs up out of that diamond shape, so kill your hands. But so I remember going up there so we could take panoramic photographs and timed so you could see the car lights going up to North Mesa and stuff. But then, of course, always this. So I don't know if those of you who grew up here back then remember the 5 o'clock whistle, which happened, and these were civil defense whistles. Now that used it just for people to set their clocks to and stuff. But so obligatory when we'd be coming down the Veronica Mesa Tower, of course we had to tie a rock to the rope for the whistle there, and so we would get as close down as we could, tie that rock, and then zoom out of there, and that would just terrorist. Sorry. So.
I have no stories anywhere close to that. The one that I do have that actually does involve Victor. One of my favorite community things is 4th of July. I love going to the Overlook. I love walking around, riding my bike down there. I love that. But one 4th of July, my family went to Victor's house and we were lighting all kinds of fireworks in his driveway. And I think it was Victor and my dad got the
And John Pickett.
and John Pickett, oldest Pickett sons. Got the idea to hook a firework to the back, it was a spinning one, to the back of Victor's mailbox. It was a plastic mailbox, and it melted that thing to shreds. And so, in classic Los Alamos fashion, what do? You don't go buy a new mailbox and replace it. You neatly cut the back off and fit a new door to it. So now it's a feature, and you have a double-sided mailbox. It's probably still there.
Oh, I wonder.
You can go check it out on Grand Canyon.
That will work.
I saw my son's eyes light up when he started on a fireworks story, like some idea for them to watch out for him more.
So I do know from our run-through.
Oh, yeah, so one thing that is kind of indicative
unique.
of the nature of Los Alamos, because a lot of these are just small town stories anyway. But I remember as a pretty young kid, late 50s, early 60s, probably very early 60s, is driving behind the HRL building in my dad's salvage panel truck and climbing on the top of that so we could watch the chimpanzees that were here being tested and trained for the space program. And so that was...
Because that's not new.
So, well, that and then also family days at the laboratory, which were very, very cool. And I remember, weirdly enough, as a 7-year-old, standing on the top of Omega West reactor on the glass thing, looking down at the drip-off glow, from the reactor. And it was perfectly safe. You got a lot of water shielding all those neutrons and stuff there. But I don't think that's the kind of thing that probably a 7-year-old would be allowed to do anymore. And in fact, the family days are much more constrained to the historical
They actually don't have
sites.
family days anymore.
Well, they have something. I'm just saying. Yeah, that's too bad. Yeah, they do have those park things, which now by lottery instead of having to be called within the first 5 seconds to get a slot.
So when I was around 7, it was similar. My mom worked in the HRL building, and every Sunday morning we'd have to go over because she had a certain experiment to finish up, and I would go feed all the mice and animals that were all the mice. And what I always thought was just this huge, it probably wasn't that big because I wasn't that tall, but just rows and rows and rows of mice. And I remember also peeking out and from the other side, not the inside part, and seeing dogs and one chimpanzee out in those cages. And Mom wasn't having to work with them, but she did have to feed the mice. And I don't think she quite ever got over it. But it was interesting. So it is. It's very different, growing up.
And we're only relatively about 10 years apart. I mean, and she and I are just looking at each other like,
Gobsmacked.
yeah.
Or do you guys remember, I don't know, a lot of more of the rowdy kids, maybe a thing called skeeching during the winter when you would grab on the back of a bumper of a driving car and you would slide your feet down the road?
Do not do
Well,
that.
Yeah, it's not safe.
As she looks at her son.
I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, especially the old Volkswagen Hubs that had the little tubular bumper. Well, they had a bumper and then this tube thing that was perfect for that. And I remember this Mr. Peterson lived up on Arizona. He would come pick up his kids at Pajarito School and drive up in the snow. So it was inevitable that there would be 5 kids being dragged, but he would stop and be, "Hurry, you kids, get off my bumper."
on that note,
Yes. So this is from the outsider's point of view. What are some myths or misconceptions that you feel people outside of Los Alamos have about this town?
I wanted to mention when I was probably freshman or sophomore at Texas Tech, taking a just basic U.S. history class. And of course, the TA didn't know I was from Los Alamos. She was teaching the Manhattan Project, and she told her class that, well, first of all, she said that, Trinity had happened here, and then because of that, we had roaches that were 3 feet tall. I mean, she was dead serious, so that was a little disappointing.
She did go talk to the professor.
I did go talk to her, but I don't remember how that went, now that I think about it, but.
She'd seen that movie Down or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Dance,
For those of us that live here now, it is true. The trip from White Rock to Los Alamos is the exact same distance as Los Alamos to White Rock. And maybe this is just by virtue, this isn't necessarily Los Alamos, but it's New Mexico. I've been asked if I have a computer. I've been asked if I have a green card. I've been told my English is really good. So that's not necessarily Los Alamos, but I think it has to do because I'm here.
Any other myths?
Well, I've been surprised just working in the guest cottage of the museum is the number of people that, so obviously most people come because they're coming to see stuff about the Manhattan Project and especially following the Oppenheimer movie. But there's also people that come in that, like, for example, maybe they come skiing, they ski in the morning, then in the afternoon they need to find something to do, and they find the pamphlet things to do, and so they come to the museum, and people that are just absolutely oblivious to that the Manhattan Project happened at all, and that it happened here, and then kind of alongside that, but not quite as bad, is people that do not understand that the laboratory is still a growing concern. They think, oh, what happened to all the land and stuff? Well, there's still a laboratory there. They're doing things still.
And we do, at the History Museum, we get a lot of calls, saying, is Los Alamos open today? And we're like, well, that's the town. You certainly can drive up. Can we, we'd like to see an explosion. And it's like, no, that's and there's, so many things. So we tried. The funniest thing that when I really realized how people did not know anything about Los Alamos, I was in Omaha, and I was working for a fabulous photographer, and I told him, look, I'm going back to work for the laboratory. I said, the FBI will call you because I'm going to get my clearance. And he said, oh, no, you're so full of it. Yeah. And so he calls me about a month later, just flipping out. Oh my goodness, the FBI called you. Called me, what, are you in trouble? What did you do? And I'm like, no, I told you this. And he's like, I didn't believe you at that time. So people, it's a very different place. Do you want to tell them the funny story about David Turk and our,
Do you know who that is? The deputy
the
DOE secretary, he came. And Todd and I had to give him a tour of the Oppenheimer house. He's a very tall man, like 6'7", very tall man. And, well, the story, though, goes back to misconceptions. But after the film was released, Oppenheimer, our typical visitor before that, I would call a history buff. You have to know enough about history to even come here. We're not on the way to anywhere, so you need to know at least something to get you up here. So typically our visitors at the museum were what I would call more history buffs. After the film released, our demographic changed pretty significantly, and we went from being history buffs to movie buffs. And that is a very different type of person. And so David Turk, as we were giving the tour of the Oppenheimer house, did ask me, your visitation really increased because of the movie, and it did. It really increased. It doubled, maybe even a little more than doubled. And I said, and I was telling him, yes, but our demographic really changed, and who our visitors were. And I told him a story about a visitor that we had in the museum who came in, and she was looking around, and we have a very large portrait of General Groves in our museum. And she looked at that big portrait, and then our docent desk is right around the corner, and she peeked around the corner and looked, and then she went back and she looked at that portrait again, and then she came back, and then she said, that's not Matt Damon. That's the real man. And so I told David that story about, that's just a representation of how our visitor changed. And then this big tall man who's fairly important in our country, just kind of looked down at the ground real sheepishly and he said, I have to tell you something. And I'm thinking, oh my word, what's this man about to tell me? And he said, we have a conference room at the Pentagon. It's called the Groves Conference Room, because, that makes it appropriate. Because we call it the Matt Damon Conference Room. I'm so embarrassed, but see, it happens everywhere. David Turk.
So what I really like about that story is that people are just people everywhere. And that it goes along with, you know, it wasn't Dr. So-and-so, it was just Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. And really, Los Alamos is very unique in that way. There's a very, you know, yes, very educated, very humble at times.
Yeah, so one story I have that goes with that is one of my friends, who, his family, they were from blue blood, Back Bay, Boston family, related to the Rockefellers. And we knew that, well, Charlie knew that his dad was in security, so we just assumed he was a security guard. And we were always wondered, how come this guy who graduated summa cum laude, Harvard Law, how come he's a security guard? And it wasn't until many years later, after we were out of college, that we finally found out that he wasn't a security guard. He was international security at the laboratory, you know, doing all kinds of stuff with things that were going on with Russia and stuff. But yeah, we just had no idea.
Just with people being people, one thing I love about Los Alamos is, like, I think we all kind of, like, look the same. And our houses all look the same if they're not the exact same. They're all very similar. So we had a friend recently come visit from Albuquerque. He grew up there in a very wealthy part of Albuquerque. Very wealthy. That was his childhood. And so he drives around, and I live in a duplex, and I know this guy's heart. He's really kind, really sweet. He meant nothing by it, but he, in the most gentle way, asks, so, why are all the houses, like, not nice? And I was like, well, I take that personally, because I live in a duplex, thank you. And he goes, is there not really any money in town? And I was like, I think actually there's the most millionaires per capita in town. And he was dumbfounded. He's like, are you kidding? I said, I was like, look it up. And so he Googled, and he was just shocked, having grown up in wealth that shows wealth compared to here, wealth that everybody does it all. And I love that, and it doesn't feel like this competition of my Lexus is better than your Lexus type of thing. Ferrari versus Ferrari, I don't know. But I think that's cool about our town. And I love my duplex, for the record.
So how do you think Los Alamos has changed over time as you've grown older? What are some of the most significant shifts that you see in your lifetime? And that's obviously, like from Michaela to Victor. I have to keep saying I'm sorry. But that is a shift. So what are some of those significant shifts?
I'm gonna say in my lifetime, probably two things. The closing of CB Fox was huge, I think. And like in addition to that, just the economic sort of loss of economic vitality, especially in White Rock. When I grew up in the early 80s, well, pretty much all of the 80s, I mean, that whole Longview area, I mean, we had toy stores and candy stores, stationery store, we had Gordon's. That's where Gordon's originated, which is now turned into the summer concert series here. I mean, that was thriving. It was a thriving area down there, and I miss that. I think that's been huge.
That is true. That's I remember, if you guys remember Gibson's down in White House, they had the best, longest candy aisle for kids. And they would always put the candy on the bottom shelf, which was so great for us because we weren't very tall. But one thing that I do miss a little bit is good old George Anderson. Took over Dragon Drugs. But before even the cable TV building was there, I decided to borrow my sister's bike without permission, and she had one of those quick release Raleigh 10 speeds that I jumped on, and I went down because I had to go to jazz band, and I took it, hit that curb before the cable TV building was there, so it was just parking lot. I hit that curb and jumped up, and as I'm in the air, I'm watching my front wheel just go. And I'm like, this is not going to end well. I hit the ground, and I knocked myself out, and I remember waking up and George Anderson was laying me down on the stairs saying, I've already called your parents, I've already called the doctor, you're gonna be fine. I ended up with 6 stitches right here. That doesn't happen quite as much anymore.
Big milestones that stand out to me in the town are the closing of Pajarito Road. That was devastating. I really miss riding my bike on that road. And then the building of the new grocery store. That was a day when it opened and the whole town came. Those are some, I guess, maybe 2 things that stand out to me.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest shift was the privatization of the housing, as I talked about before. But another thing was the kind of the dissolution of the community center, which as kids, and I shouldn't talk about this because I really complain about people on Facebook, these old Los Alamos people that are part of the Atomic City Kids Facebook page who haven't lived here for 40 years, but they're really upset at what's it called now? Central Park Square does not look like the community center when Zia Company had just all these pristine, beautiful flower beds, and the grass was green, and you didn't see a gopher hole anywhere because they were dead. So for me, I can get that, and I like our new thing, but just that shift, and it kind of goes along with your loss of just the vitality of commerce in this town, because there used to be a lot of stores through there, and the bowling alley there, the Sparky, well, first Arati Soda Fountain, and then Sparky's, and then Viola's there, and
Pizza Hut used to be up here.
yeah, so it's just, that was a big change.
And for the youngins, CB Fox used to be called Clement and
Benner.
Benner. And the Benners lived right on down the street from us, and that gentleman was amazing.
He
Because
was
from
the
the time,
nicest guy.
absolutely, from the time I was little, every time he would see me, he's like, wow, you've grown. Your shoe is now a 5.5. And I'm like, how do you even know these things? But
That's
he-
a salesman.
yeah, I mean, it's just amazing,
My mom remembers, and I don't know if it was with Clement Benner or CB Fox, one of the two, but she would go in to purchase clothes, for us, and they would just let her take home whatever she wanted, try it on, and, it was just, they trusted her to bring back what she didn't, and then she would pay for it when she came back, and, you never find that these days.
So who remembers the Center Theater and what was the last movie that was played there?
What's the Center Theater?
Yeah.
The old movie theater that's on Central Park Square? I remember the theater, but not the last
It
movie.
was right in between Sparky's and the bowling.
Yes.
Do you guys remember? What was it?
Okay, first, how many of you, okay, just by show of hands, how many of you ever went to a movie in the Center Theater?
There you go.
Okay, so and that lets us know what kind of audience we have. Because it's been gone for quite a while, so. But these friends of mine on Facebook, they still bemoan the fact that, why do you do the theater now? Not realizing that the roof was caving in.
So what was the last movie?
Was it the Titanic?
Was it? Okay, I was thinking of Star Wars myself. I thought it was the first Star Wars, that's the remember.
You don't know the answer.
That's the question, that's when they answer. That's like a big,
I know.
Or up here.
I know. Jaws was there, the first Jaws. I used to be able to go to, we used to ride our bikes from the western area up to the theater. I would have $1. It would cost 75 cents, 75 cents to get into the movie, and then I would get either a candy bar or a thing of popcorn for $1. Sorry. Notice me now.
So,
Really, the Titanic? Are you sure? Because the movie's pretty new.
somebody's making a
Christian.
It's pictures Victor's beard.
Oh, it's Victor's beard. There we go.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Cut it off. Cut it off.
There is some downside to having that.
So I still think it was Star Wars was the last. No?
So based on all these changes that will continue to happen in Los Alamos and any town, what is your perspective on the future of Los Alamos, and how do you think the town is evolving now, and what is your hope for its future? Tough one.
Sounds like we're trying to like be the mayor or something.
That's right. So
One
my
of those
hope
pageant
is,
Right.
questions.
So-
Peace.
Yeah.
so we heard about the Gordon's concerts and stuff, and when, especially when it's down in White Rock, but even here at the pond, when I used to go to the Gordon's concert, I felt like I knew half the people that were there, and we have had so many hires come in, which is actually, that's great. I think we need them. And despite what the laboratory needs, I think our community needs that freshness. But it is a little concerning to me, and I'm hoping that when I go to those Gordon concerts now, when there's a zillion people that I don't know, I hope we can still retain a sense of community, and that there is, not that we're necessarily better in anywhere else or anything, but just that this is a special place. It's a unique place, both in terrain and in mission and stuff. And I'm hoping that we can retain some of that. But how do you control that? I don't know.
That's good.
I think that I've seen more diversity in Los Alamos, and I think that's a good thing. Racial diversity, people of different faiths, people of different backgrounds, all kinds of diversity. I think it's much more than when I was growing up, and I think it's really beneficial.
Yeah, speaking of diversity, I remember when this was probably late 70s or something, and when we had a team of Russian scientists, probably the first team of Russian scientists coming to Los Alamos for some kind of exchange kind of thing. And I was in between semesters or something, and I was working at the Yellow Front. Some people may remember that. And all these Russian scientists came in with their big black coats on and big heavy wool pants and big black shoes and stuff. Came in and they all bought Levi's. So, and they coming out in most of them with the cuffs rolled up, it's just that was a different, talk about shift, to suddenly have neighbors that are from mainland China and stuff like that, which is cool, and I think that increasing diversity is a really great thing.
So this is my final question before I open it up to the audience, so be thinking. If you could give advice to someone who is just moving to Los Alamos, what would it be?
I think it's a really good question, because I think when people move to town, they fall in one or two camps, they love it, maybe there's three, love it, they hate it and get out right away, or they just are like stuck with the golden handcuffs of like, I really love this job, but the town is horrible, and that I think is kind of a sad way to live. So I would encourage people to, like, if you're coming from a big city, try to change and embrace the culture of a small town. Embrace the outdoors. I think of one guy who came from, I knew him, he came from DC. The first time he came, he had this like really nice leather jacket on. We all knew he didn't belong. But then as he came, he just like jumped in and he became like this ultra marathon runner, and he just bought into the community. And so that's what I say, just buy in and don't look for fun at like bars and clubs and theaters and grocery shopping, but like, make your fun. I think you talked about, like, we've all kind of made fun, especially these two, have made a lot of fun in their lives, so, do that.
And that's so true.
Well, and Allison had a really good answer to this question.
Oh, when I run through, I said get involved and like go beyond your typical places of worship, schools, you know, if you have kids and things like that. But we have so many clubs and organizations for every interest, I think. You have to work to find them, I think, sometimes. I do hear a lot from people that it's very isolating to move here, maybe even more so than other small towns because of some of the unique nature of the town. But the people that I think are most successful are the ones that just really get out. And whatever interest you have, there's probably a group that, you know, does that. And so keep looking, and I think once you find your people, you'll enjoy it.
And slow down, that would probably be my biggest thing, is just slow down, understand that it is a small town. Don't drive 50 miles an hour down Central. Remember that everything closes up at 8 o'clock. Get your food before then and head home, you know, and just, so, just really just slow down and embrace that small town culture.
Yeah, well, and as we were talking about this before, I was thinking of, if you have a couple who moves here because one of the partner's spouse gets a job at the lab, then you might have somebody who's has their own very qualified in their field and stuff, but doesn't have a job in this town, and so that can be very very isolating as well. And so I think what Allison was saying is finding things, getting involved, and also one of my concerns is we have a lot of foreign postdocs and other foreign workers that have come in here, and they come on a work visa, and their spouse probably does not have a work visa, and so it can be very hard for them because they can't just get a job, any job, and they can't get a job in their field. And so volunteering, getting involved in the different activities, clubs and stuff like that.
Volunteering at the Historical Society.
That's right.
The Historical Society.
We're going to be having a training in February.
Yeah, so those things can be very important to just cut down that isolation, and that's been true since the start of the Manhattan Project, and it might have been even true with the homestead era, of where you had people sitting alone in their homestead, and their nearest neighbor was a mile away or something. So, and that's a reality of that kind of life. But it's good to be around people, and to even if you're an extreme introvert, not that Los Alamos has any of those, but that you still need sense of community.
There's even a club at the library where they just have, you can come, and it's a book club, but you just come and you read your book with other people side by side, but you don't talk, you just read.
It's a club for introverts.
I would hate it, I'm a huge extrovert, but I mean, I'm telling you, there's something for everybody.
What,
All right. Oh, go ahead.
board games, there's that club.
Yeah, there's a board
Smith's
game
and-
club that used to meet on the second floor of Smith. I don't know if it still does, but yeah, I'm sure the club still exists. I just don't know her name. All right, questions from our audience.
I know so many people who grew up here and could hardly wait to leave and never thought they would come back. Did any of you have that?
I did, yeah. I loved to go to college, got married right after college, and we lived in Dallas, Fort Worth for 17 years. We moved back primarily, I think, because we had 2 boys at that point, and it was becoming just unsafe. I mean, they couldn't even walk out to get the mail without being supervised. And my husband came from a small town in Texas, and so he's used to that. So we came back.
Yeah, I never felt that driving need of, oh, I gotta get out of this place. I knew I would leave, and I did, and was essentially, other than during some summer vacations and stuff, I was away for 20 years. But also part of that same thing that when we had a toddler and we were living in Albuquerque, we thought, it'd be nice to live in a safer place. so then we came up here and that worked out great, I think. It was a little shocking to my wife at first, that there were no places, that there were no places to really shop.
Couldn't find the post office.
Oh, down in White Rock, yeah. Where's the post office? There wasn't one.
It's this. Who knew?
Anyone else?
Being at least 5 years behind Victor, I wondered if we could have a show of hands on how many people saw the Parade Clowns play?
Oh my goodness.
And,
That's
uh,
fantastic.
and if for the younger people, Victor could talk a little more about that, because I did not see as many games as he did.
Well, yeah, and there's quite a bit of stuff online. You can also go over to the little monument thing over in front of the library. But yeah, it was pretty fantastic. Von Ryan, who was one of the fastest softball pitchers in the country, who could strike out just about anybody. But they just did a lot of antics on the field. And part of the reason they could do the antics is because they were all really good. And one thing that was amazing to me is Jim Higgins, who had been my shop teacher at Pueblo Junior High, and which, by the way, I was surprised when I went to college to find out that other kids did not have shops in their elementary schools, where we had cabinet saws and everything. But anyway, to see Jim Higgins covering the whole outfield, just how fast he could run and stuff was just amazing. So, you know, the pitched grapefruit, playing dice at the at home plate, and they were fantastic. Rudy Raper just being able to cover that whole outfield as well, just amazing stuff. And as you know from the history, probably is they raised quite a bit of money, all going to charity. So they did not personally make money on that. It all went to charity, and they beat some really good teams and had a pretty. They did lose some games, but they won a lot.
This was a precursor to the Savannah Bananas.
Oh, yeah. Got to see.
Yes, I got to see the Savannah Bananas in Albuquerque. But Bun Ryan's son is also an excellent softball pitcher, and he'd come throw batting practice to us on Fridays. Man, we were pumped when we touched the ball.
I'm curious if any of you have noticed a change in the wildlife behavior over time. Specifically, you know, the way the deer are like, could care less about humans. And was that the same when you were growing up, or has it always been that way?
I think there was a huge shift during COVID with that for sure, but when I was younger, I think the deer were definitely a little more skittish at that time. The skunks definitely were not skittish. I remember being sprayed a couple of times because I was going to stay away from. But I think the coyotes I haven't seen that change.
So when I was a kid, though, I think so. We still had perimeter guards out on these and the little cabin kinds of thing, perimeter guards. And I think probably if they saw a coyote, if they saw a mountain lion, they would just shoot it. And so it was pretty rare. Although one interesting story, at the corner of Arizona and 45th Street, where I can't think of the name of that street. There was a park, and it was on the northeast, well, pre-Fireman's Market. There was a little park. It was a swing set and a slide on the northeast corner of that intersection. And then some kids came home or something because they had seen a mountain lion. And so they told their mothers, and their mothers complained. And so they moved the park across the street. Still had the same slide and swing set, and then later on became Pinocchio Park, and then Fireman's Park. But But we really did not have very many coyotes or mountain lions around at that time. But another thing I noticed is porcupines, so I can take a survey right here. We used to see porcupines, I would probably see one either hiking or sleeping on the side of the road, probably at least once a month. And the last time I saw a porcupine here in town was probably about 35 years ago, and it was sleeping over by, in the side of the road over by the United Church, and that's the last I've seen or heard. When's the last time anyone saw a porcupine?
There about 25 years ago.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
Usually 20 years ago, when I could still walk down under the bridge. I walked down and just, it's, hello lady.
Yeah, it's been a long time, so there definitely has been some change in wildlife.
I think the deer, yeah, in my lifetime would become much more, unafraid. I was gonna mention that it's weird to see coyotes in people's driveways and yards, but then I remember when in the 80s, my mom told me that her friend left her door open on Hoya Loop and the coyote was in her house. So, I mean, maybe that probably hasn't changed. One thing that has, I think, is that I grew up in White Rock and I still live in White Rock now, and there's bears in White Rock now, and that used to be like never happened, so that is somewhat different. I can't explain why.
So we had a wonderful concert in the Oppenheimer House a couple weeks ago. Max Gomez, a singer-songwriter, Americana. And I was standing down and everybody was just sort of filing out. And I watched this bobcat just walk across, through the carport and on, and was not concerned about any of the people at all. So I think, there's differences. And we had that bear, if you guys remember, who walked into the senior center and then just turned around and walked out. They told him he was too young for lunch. And
And my husband's had bears, I don't know, in a lab building not too long ago, so that doesn't seem to be infrequent here.
Well, and when Gordon McDonough and I were bringing the desk in one of the rooms upstairs here. So by the way, if you have been around here and you haven't been to the museum lately, there's always new things and stuff, including these two of the rooms upstairs here on the balcony that are displays there. And we were bringing one of the desks for there and driving down at 10 o'clock in the morning. This is just probably, I don't know how many years ago was that, 3 or 4 years ago? And driving down 15th Street, and here's this bear coming, and he kept wanting to turn this way towards town or towards downtown. And I was trying to get, turn left, but he would not listen to me. And I think it's that same one that went into some of the things along Allenheimer.
one thing, Mike Catco, he's one of my neighbors, and I remember peeking out my window one morning, and I see this, I'm like, oh, that's a big dog. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's a bear. And it wasn't a very big bear, but Mike was out in his yard, and the bear was just not even paying attention and walked right up into Mike's legs and bumped into him. They looked at each other, and the bear just kind of went under dog.
It's better to move out that way.
One of the ladies I worked with recently was telling me her husband, they're avid bike commuters to work. Her husband was riding on Diamond, turning the corner right around First Baptist, and he's right next to the guardrail, and out of nowhere a deer smacked him, and he on the bike, and he got hit into traffic, and he's like clipped into his bike, and he's on top of the deer, I think, and they're like wrestling in the middle of traffic, and trying to get out, and the deer's kicking him, and so he got all scratched up, but what do you know, small town, a friend was in traffic right behind him, stopped, picked him up, put his bike in the truck, took him home, got him all cleaned up.
That's a quintessential Los Alamos story, like the whole thing, right? The wildlife, the bike, the friend.
He had to call his boss and say I was hit by a deer.
Right. The boss doesn't blink an
And they're
eye.
like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Another question?
So, this might be more Victor's era, but,
We're in the same era, that's the thing.
has anybody else been in a vehicle driving onto Los Alamos Reservoir in January and surviving.
So, I never did that. Although one time, Bob and I were ice fishing there, and it's pretty cold down in that canyon, and we probably had cut through 10 inches of ice to do it. And so it's very cold, so we had a fire going to keep warm. And I've only twice, of all the many times I went to the reservoir, only twice have seen a police car there. And so sure enough, a police car came and said, and pointed kind of to the sign there that said no fires. You need to put out that fire. And I did not say it, I don't want to be a total smart aleck, but you know, it also says no swimming, or back then it did. And I wanted to say, well, I suppose you think we're swimming too, but then, you know, once you put out a fire like that, I think we just folded up our stuff and went home. It was just too cold. So, yeah, I used to get those 10 inches, but I'm guessing from the question, John, that you probably did that. So.
I wasn't the driver.
There's supposed to
And,
be a
and the
snowmobile.
driver and the car owner, his father was the pastor at the Church of Christ at the time. So, yeah.
There's supposed to be a snowmobile at the bottom of the reservoir.
Oh, wow. Probably not anymore.
So I wonder if there are things that you both were in Los Alamos years ago and now you're back. Are there things that you like better about Los Alamos now than back then?
Good question.
I'm not sure if it's that I like better, it's maybe I have a more accurate understanding and appreciation. I really appreciate the community events. I didn't know how much I liked that as a kid, but 4th of July, the Kite Festival, homecoming, the rodeo, all those things, I think I have more of an appreciation for that. I think I actually have an appreciation for like having a few restaurants to choose from. Being in Albuquerque, I just felt like, I don't know, let's go to Wendy's. Like, I don't know what to do. And I appreciate that now. So I think it's more just I've grown to appreciate it because I didn't know what I had as a kid.
The climate, I absolutely love the climate. I mean, it has gotten, I've noticed, when I grew up, it was 85 degrees was hot. I'm sure most of you remember that. Now, you know, summer's 90 somewhat, but I really appreciate the climate, the dry, and coming, I don't like the humidity down in Texas, so.
Well, and also having 4 distinct seasons, none of which are too extreme.
Yeah,
Because
that's
we
true.
lived in North Carolina for a while, and summer was just really hot and muggy, and winters, because of the moisture in the air, were even, it could be 40 degrees and it felt like 20, just chill you to your bone. And then I lived in Southern California also before that, and it just, you know, fall was, there was one type of tree. The leaves would fall off overnight, and that was fall. So that's boring. So I have really gotten more to appreciate, although I still not really like snow that much, but I appreciate that we don't get too much, because I also lived in Nebraska for a while and saw the same ice over all some winter long.
So it took me quite a few months to realize that what I was looking at in Omaha was just the horizon with clouds. It wasn't the sun rays. I was like, wait a minute, this is... One thing that I do really appreciate about Los Alamos, it doesn't matter if I just go to Santa Fe or if I'm going to Los Angeles. As soon as I turn on the truck route and start coming up, I'm like, oh, I'm home. You know, and that's
So I'm sorry, I think I misstated the question. The question that I meant to ask, although this is very interesting also, is are there things that you like about Los Alamos now better than Los Alamos then?
I know.
Obviously it's changed, so...
knowing you, because I didn't know you.
Oh. I've only lived here 30 years, so I'm a newcomer.
I know, I'm gonna think about that one, David. I'm gonna like contact you, because I'm gonna come up with something. There's gotta be something. I'm not sure it's it's changed that much. I mean, it's changed in some ways a lot, but then in other ways, I'm like, gosh, I don't know.
You mentioned, Allison, earlier the change in diversity. How do you like that better?
Yeah, that is true. I don't feel like I met any people of color before college. And I think, yeah, I think that was, a disservice to not have that kind of diversity. Thank you.
Okay, let's thank our panelists for their